Welcome back to the channel, I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to make an entryway bench, and for that we got this big old piece of rough sawn walnut. So without wasting any more of your time, let's get started. So this slab of walnut I have here is a little over 6 feet tall, and the bench I want to make, I want to keep under about 4 feet. So the first thing I want to do is square off one end before I roughly cut the slab down to the size I'm looking for. So I'm just marking a line with my straight edge here, and since I don't have a track saw, what I'm going to do is take this piece of flat bar that I have and use that as a guide for my circular saw. Now the overall depth of my circular saw isn't enough to completely go through the walnut slab, so I'm going to finish up the cut with a pull saw, and then we'll just clean up the cut later. Now that I've got the one end squared off, I can use that as a reference to cut this slab down to the size I'm looking for, which is about 44 inches. And then we're going to do more of the same, start a cut with the circular saw and finish her off with the pull saw. This would be a lot easier with the track saw, but at the end of the day this is going to give us the same results, just going to take a little bit of extra time and patience. Now since this is an entryway bench, I want to be able to sit more or less flush against a wall. So using the T-square here, I'm just going to draw out my cut line, removing one of the live edges. And I'm doing my best here to remove as little material as I can. After all, I do want this bench to be usable, not just there for looks. Now I've got this scrap piece of 1x3 that I'm using as a guide for my circular saw. It's not quite long enough, but it'll do the job. Since this slab is rough sawn and it hasn't been surfaced yet, I use some CA glue to secure the 1x3 to the slab. I'm sure this isn't best practice, and maybe a few folks will have some things to say about it, but at the end of the day it was quick, easy, and it worked. And since we still have to surface this slab, I'm not too concerned about a little bit of CA glue. Sometimes you just gotta make something work. And just like the previous cuts, we're gonna start her off with the circular saw and then finish the cut with the pull saw. Now I really enjoy this part right here. We're gonna start surfacing the slab. For me, this is one of those times in a project when what you're working on starts to look like the thing you want it to be. I know that's not overly eloquent, but I'm sure it makes sense to somebody out there. Now to flatten this slab, I'm using a 2 1/4 inch helical flattening bit. It's one of those budget friendly ones you can pick up on Amazon. I've been using it for about a month now and I don't really have any complaints. Now if you've never flattened a slab on a router table, you don't want to do it all in one go. You want to do the lightest passes you can. I may be doing around a 1/16 of an inch with each pass. This is going to give you a lot more control. It's also going to help reduce any tear out, which is especially important if you're working with resins. Maybe you're doing a river table or something, and it's a little bit safer. Something to keep in mind though, if you're going to build yourself a router sled, this is going to create a lot of sawdust. So if it's in your budget and you're smarter than I am, you might want to hook up some kind of dust extraction. I think when all was said and done here, the sawdust this made filled my shop vac up about 2 times. And now that we got one side of her board nice and flat, we're just going to flip her around, do the exact same thing on the other side. So now that we got our slab all nice and flat there, the next thing I want to do is take my orbital sander with some 80 grit sandpaper on it and start sanding out these milling marks that the router's left behind. And then we want to start cleaning up the live edge there. So I like using the orbital sander for this. Sometimes I might use a brass wire wheel on my drill, but in most cases I find that to be a little bit of a waste of time. I find when cleaning up a live edge with my orbital sander that I get the best results when I use the edge of the sander. I find this helps me get rid of the remaining bark without completely flattening and destroying the look of the live edge itself. Okay, so on the bench here, you can see on both corners that we have some chip out that would have happened during the milling process. As well, there's some small cracks or splits in the wood that we need to address so they don't continue splitting over time. So to fill these in and stabilize these areas, we're going to pour some epoxy. The epoxy I'm using is called ice epoxy. It's made here in Canada. I've used it for a few years now. Never really had any problems. It's definitely a very user-friendly product, and considering how much epoxy resins cost, this stuff's pretty budget-friendly, all things considered. If you're at all interested in giving it a try, I'll leave an Amazon link in the description below. Now since we're dealing with a rather odd shape here, to make sure our epoxy doesn't end up all over the table and floor, I'm sealing everything up using tuck tape. Now when I pour resin, I really don't like using any sort of tape to dam everything up. In my experience, you're usually just taking fate into your own hands at that point, but I really couldn't figure out a better way to seal everything up and do this resin pour. Now if you are going to use any kind of tape to seal up your resin pours, and again I don't necessarily recommend doing that, use tuck tape. It's going to stick to your project a lot better than packing tape, duct tape, and definitely painter's tape. And the stuff's pretty durable, but again in my mind it's not best practice. Sometimes though you got to roll the dice and hope for the best. Alright, so off camera I mixed up a small batch of the epoxy. I also added some black tint to it. It's nothing overly fancy, but black epoxy and walnut seem to go hand in hand together, at least in my opinion. I'm sure there's enough folks out there who'd give me pushback on that, but hey, nothing wrong with differences of opinions. So it's been about 24 hours since the pour, and thankfully the tuck tape held up and we didn't have any leaks. So now it's on to some more of everybody's favorite part of woodworking, sanding. Now before we do any more sanding, I want to lay out the position of the legs for this bench and install some threaded inserts. The legs I'm using for this bench are just those modern legs everybody's seen on Instagram and all over social media. You can usually get them for a pretty reasonable price off Amazon. I think though for future projects, I'll just make it a point to build my own. So I got the legs lined up where I want them. They have pre-drilled out holes, so I'm going to use those as a reference and take a center punch and use that to mark out the holes where I want to drill out for the insert. Now I do want to say if you don't have a center punch in your tool collection, you should really think about getting one. They're real handy and honestly they don't cost that much money. Maybe 10 or 20 bucks at the hardware store. I think I got a pack of 2 for about 11 bucks off Amazon. I really don't want to plug them too much, but a deal's a deal. So ultimately to drill out the holes for the threaded insert, I'm using this drill press for a drill. Truth be told, I have no idea what this is called, but again, it's one of those tools you can get for fairly cheap. I picked this one up at Canadian Tire. I'm pretty sure it was under 30 Canuck bucks. That's about 3 Freedom coins. But anyways, this is a handy tool to have if your piece is too big for a drill press, or you just don't have the budget or space for one. And heck, if you're picking it up at Canadian Tire like I did, you could probably use your points, get a little bit of a discount, or maybe even for free. Anyways, enough about that. I'm not affiliated with them whatsoever. But again, if you can get a deal, get a deal. The next step here is to just screw in our threaded inserts. They use an Allen key bit to drive them into the wood. Other than that, it's just like sinking a screw, so not much to say here. Now with the orbital sander, we're going to take everything from about 80 grit to 220. Again, not a whole heck of a lot to say here. It's really just sanding. Now as you can see here, our edges are pretty sharp, and if you caught yourself on one of them, you're definitely going to be adding some money to the swear jar. The other issue these sharp edges can cause over time, they have more of a tendency to tear away or chip out. So ideally you're going to break the edges. For this I'm going to use a roundover bit on my router. In my opinion, this softens the look up a little bit and just adds some subtle detail. Now if you don't have a router, you can just as easily break the edge with some sandpaper. You don't need to be that aggressive with it either. We're just trying to reduce that sharp 90-degree angle a little bit. And after I hit this with the router, I'm going to finish it off with some 220 grit sandpaper. Now I don't know how important this is at the end of the day with a piece of furniture. It is something I do with cutting boards and serving boards, but again with furniture, I'm not 100% sure. This is just what I was taught to do. So right here I'm water popping the grain. If you're unfamiliar with what that is, after your final sand, what you want to do is wet your whole surface down. This is going to lift the grain up, and then you let it dry. And once everything's all nice and dry, you're going to take the last grit of sandpaper you used, so in this case it's 220, and you're just going to sand everything back down. From what I was taught, this is going to make your overall project smoother, and if it ever gets wet, the grain's not going to resurface, giving you a rough or fuzzy finish. But again, I'm not 100% certain if this is necessary with a piece of furniture. Maybe someone can let me know in the comments. Now we're at the point where we can finally add our wood finish. So I'm almost certain if you're watching this video, this isn't the first woodworking video you've ever watched before. That more than likely means you're no stranger to Rubio Monocoat, and that's definitely a fine wood finish. But I'm trying something different here called Natrua One Coat. More than certain I mispronounced that, but the reason why I'm giving this a go is because it was honestly half the price of Rubio Monocoat here in Canada. I think I paid $50 for this, and they're asking about $120 for the same amount of Rubio. So if this gives me comparable results, I don't see why I wouldn't use it. And other than that, works about the same as Rubio. This is a 2-part system you're gonna mix up. And then I just applied it to the surface, rubbed it in as easily as I could. Then the instructions tell you to let it stand for a little bit. And then when it's time, you just wipe off the excess and let this 2-part finish cure. Alright, so our finish is all cured up, and now we can go ahead and install our legs. The good thing about using threaded inserts is they come with the accompanying fasteners, so you can make pretty quick work of the install without much thought. Alright, it's about that time. Let's take a look at what we built. So at the end of the day, this is a pretty simple build. Realistically, just about anybody can do it. You don't really need that many tools, and you certainly don't need anything expensive. But the part I probably like the most about this project here is the chip out on the front left that we repaired with resin. I really like when you're able to add those little unexpected details to a project. Anyways, if you made it this far, maybe consider subscribing to my channel and throwing a like. And if you hadn't seen last week's video, maybe give that a look. Anyways, I do want to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.